Good morning, everyone. My name is Tobani Sipoyo. I am the Heritage Officer of the South African Heritage Resources Agency, Built Environment Unit. Firstly, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us at the Sustainable Conservation in Built Environment session and webinar to celebrate our National Heritage Day. A couple of speakers will be joining us in presenting today's program, and we would like to thank you for taking the time to be with us this morning. Before we begin our program, I would like a message from our CEO, Advocate Lungisa Malgas. Thank you.
African Heritage Resources Agency. Thank you all for joining us today as we celebrate the unique and diverse heritage of the country we call home. We are honored and humbled to have you as our guests. We are further honored to take this opportunity to share and celebrate the many areas of our cultural heritage resources with our community as we celebrate Heritage Month 2022. We are extremely diverse society with many layers in our heritage landscape, and we acknowledge that the greatest part about our heritage is this diversity. We are a nation of 11 official languages that also celebrates other languages commonly used by our international friends and visitors. We are also a nation that celebrates the indigenous languages of the First Nations that originated in our beautiful land. We come from a painful past which will forever be tainted by the legacy of apartheid and colonialism, which is why our heritage is so extremely important to us. Our heritage is a source of identity and cohesion for our nation. It makes us who we are. It shapes and molds us and gives us a sense of belonging. It is a story for all our children to share irrespective of their differences. It is passed down from generation to generation, linking the present to the past. Our heritage finds expression in our rituals, food, music, art, and our significant sites and objects. This is what makes South Africa a magnificent space. We are home to the most beautiful sites, objects, dating back prehistorical times, which opens a window into lives of the earliest ancestors of our humankind. Our indigenous knowledge systems, which have been preserved by our elders and traditional healers, are also a vital part of our heritage. This year's Heritage Month webinar series is taking place in the shadow of COVID-19, which has taken massive toll on human life, on our communities, and on our economy. As the world recovers from the battle against COVID-19, we are encouraged by the united global effort to beat the virus. It shows that through collaboration and cooperation, we can achieve and overcome anything on this planet, which is why we are taking this year's Heritage Month webinar as an opportunity for us to collaborate and build a global network of partners that will assist us in developing a world-class heritage sector in South Africa. I thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. A few housekeeping rules for this morning. I'd like to let everyone know that the sign language interpreter will be available via our YouTube link on the corner as each speaker speaks. And secondly, I would like to let everyone know after each speaker will be taking questions for speed of time in order for questions not to be lost. Firstly, I would like to also let everyone else know that the main reason for this talk is that, as the CEO pointed out in his speech, is that we need to have a look at how we consolidate heritage practice and bridge the gap between what we do as SAHRA especially in the built environment unit, and our preoccupations in terms of conservation, preservation, as well as how we relate to the public and the public in general relates to us. And in that vein, we have both the technical side of the work that we do, as well as all the issues that we deal with on an everyday basis. However, this is more a survey of the work that we do and how it relates to the public at large. Our first speaker is Dr. Pallav Kumar and Ms. Mapole Loke from the Cape Town Cape Peninsula University of Technology, I beg your pardon. And they'll be speaking on sustainable material use for significant sites. Ms. Mapole Loke is currently occupied doing her civil engineering doctorate. Ms. Loke is a candidate of engineering technologist registered with the Engineering Council of South Africa. She holds a diploma in civil engineering, a bachelor's in technology in civil engineering, a master's degree in civil engineering, and is currently enrolled for a doctoral degree in civil engineering structures at the Peninsula University of Technology. She is an academic, published author of a number of research papers with a key focus on the sustainable restoration of heritage materials, mortars in particular. Her work experience includes construction, supervision of various civil engineering projects involving construction materials analysis, water, sanitation, and roadworks. Joining her will be Dr. Kumar Pallav. Professor Kumar is an associate professor at the Department of Civil Engineering and Geomatics at the Cape Peninsula University of Technology. His research areas mainly focused on heritage structures, material characterization, and development. He's also a chartered engineer and also an Erasmus Mundus Fellow. He has published several peer-reviewed articles and has been the reviewer of reputed journals. In collaboration with SAHRA and CPUT, he is working on establishing a center on sustainable heritage for conservation of heritage sites in South Africa. I'd like to take a moment for you to welcome the two speakers, Ms. Mapole Loke and Professor Kumar Pallav. Thank you.
Thank you, Gavani. Thank you very much for the introductions. And yes, we are very thankful to SAHRA for all their support to work on those sites. So let me share my screen, and in order to start the presentation, so let me know once you see my screen. Can you see? Yeah. So my intended topic for this Heritage Week webinar at Built Environment Unit will be on heritage structures, building material analysis, conservation, and restorations, right? So the outline of my presentation is the introduction, then material and its development, which is going to be presented by Ms. Loke, then testing and analysis for planning purpose, initiation for internship programs, and conclusions. So what are heritage structures? As I mentioned earlier, that structures that are internationally and nationally important and represent the unique past of the country. That is its aesthetic culture, natural heritage, religious history, military history, political history, or special events. Why we need the characterization and analysis? Because the heritage cementing material, those are quite important, and slowly you can say it's a topic of great importance in order to protect our heritage for future generations. And further analyzing them gives us insight about how they are maintained or made during those periods. And similar kind of material can be developed in order to get the compatibility, and definitely it will help us to restore these structures for long run.
Sorry, Dr. Pallav?
Current, can you hear us?
No, unfortunately, you just have to put your slideshow a bit larger.
Oh, okay.
Then we'll let you know. Apologies for that, everyone.
No problem. Let me know. Can you see just a moment? I'll just, yeah, sorry. Is it
That's
right
perfect.
now?
Thank you. That's perfect.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you for this. So current research CPUT. So current research at CPUT in collaboration with SAHRA, we are working on heritage material characterization and its development. And we are in process of developing heritage material card, HMC, for each of these important structures. And the work is initiated, and at present moment, Ms. Lok is working on that, and she's going to present about it. Further, we are also working on a heritage building testing and analysis, and that work was almost completed by Mr. Rayan, and the things are available with me, and I'm going to show what we have done till now. So this is the work which Ms. Lok has initiated, and she already completed her master's, and in that she has developed characterized the material like it's all its primary content, and now at her doctoral level she is trying to characterize in more detail with high-end test, and recently she received a grant and visited Granada for like 3 months, where she worked with Prof. Coultron in order to characterize these material in more detail, to repair and restore them with the replica material, which is her second part of the work, which she's going to do in next few months, and to show that how well it is going to be um, replicate with the original material. So we are just looking for the replication, but we are also seeing how well it can behave with the structure as well. So the part of her work was aesthetic property, physical property, mineralogical property, chemical properties, and we will come up with this card, which was initially developed during our previous work. But now this card will be more refined once we have got all the results from the high-end characterization. So this card will definitely help us with each of this side while we are going for restoration, to know what kind of binder, aggregate, additives are used while these structures were made. And definitely the new restoration work needs to be incorporated with new material, but those new material definitely needs to be in line of the old material, so that they can mingle with each other nicely. So what we are looking forward with this work, we are trying to create a museum. We already applied a grant at UNESCO with the help of SAHRA, and we are waiting for the outcome of that. And so with these museum, we have already seen this in Granada. They have well maintained the material mineral museum. So that concept came from there, that we can also develop a similar kind of museum where we can put this material, develop the new materials for the restoration purpose. And even we can look how this engineering design on all these structure has impacted the social change. So the insight will be how these construction practice were there and how it has been moved forward till now. Further, we are also looking forward towards development of heritage tools, sustainable heritage tool that encompasses heritage conservation and the establishment of heritage green rating to change the South African heritage landscape in built environment. Further, we are also looking for various partnership with other stakeholders that can further develop and enhance these proposals. Next part of the work is on the structures, and where we want to estimate the mechanical properties, its compressive strength, Young's modulus, and Poisson's ratio. So work was initiated using NDT so that we can't damage these structures. So we did NDT testing by just touching the surfaces, and the work was carried by Mr. Rayan at Dal Josephat, 1826 Parl site. And you can see this is a cape Dutch architect, which is very good example of such architecture where they have incorporated these gables, and we call it as holo. That is what it is, and it is a H-shaped Dutch architecture structures. So this is a manor house in Paarl, and for this we also calculated, indicated all these cracks which you can see here. These are the crack which we have just from the visual inspection we have located. And further, we also measured the depth with the NDT testing. So wherever we have shown this is red, this is throughout the wall. The wall thickness is close to around 630. So it is all through the wall, this site CD9. If you go back, this is a CD9 site, and it is the wall is entirely broke. So this type of study will definitely help us to set up the priority on all these structures, that which structures need to be repair, restore, and taken into consideration at one go. We also did compressive strength through the NDT testing, like hammer testing and UPV testing, and we try to plot the distribution of the forces throughout the structure. So if we see the left-hand side of the structure is quite weak as compared to the right-hand side of the structure. So this can give a fair idea that which portion of the structure needs to be taken care first on the first basis. Although if we see the values, the entire wall is not in good shape, but definitely, yeah, the process can be taken care where the structure is more weak, right? So we are looking forward to see how to develop, like look for the bursary to attract masters and PhD students. So yeah, we are looking for some internship or some bursary so that at least one masters and one PhD student can be funded throughout the throughout his masters in order to propagate this work and also to build resources in this area. Even the short internship program can be performed. Like if the work of urgent need is there, we can put some short funding or internship so that someone can work on that. Because yes, these are important sites, and we can attract people to work on that through short internship. Further, I also recommend, and we are working to develop a high-end testing and analysis with the unit, which is called Sustainable Heritage Research Unit. And all such important heritage structures need to be tested and analyzed, and we can set the order of priority that, yeah, this structure needs to be taken care first, second, third. So we can just set up the priorities. And more partner needs to be support research and development on heritage restoration through fundings. So the future project, which I already mentioned in my previous session, but we just keep on updating, like formulating material property card for the heritage structures and its development. So the digital collection must be made. Further, we are also in process of making 3D models and inserting all these properties in the wall so that one can click and get that properties, that what properties is used on which wall, so that can be known with the digital stamping of the material. Then NDT test on the heritage structures can be performed in order to set up priorities or grading of that structure. So this can be a big project which can be taken up. Then gravity and dynamic analysis to identify the critical element in the heritage structures. And further challenges on getting some, like we should get some industrial partner that can understand and move forward with these works. Funding for the research projects, and yes, funding to the student as well. So yeah, thank you for your patience listening. Any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Dr. Pallav. Thank you very much for that presentation, Dr. Pallav. Firstly, I'd like to let everyone know that you can type your questions in the chat box below so that we can basically know what the questions are from each person. I'd like to begin the question session by asking the following questions. First of all, Dr. Pallav, I'd like to know from you whether or not, what are the issues that you've had to address due to the pandemic, as well as the work that you've been doing, and how does it relate to industry at large? Have you found it easy or difficult for some of the work to be consumed, so to speak, by industry? Thank you.
Thank you, Vani. I think, yes, during the pandemic, the work was paused. You can say we are not able to visit the site, and the things got delayed. But a major challenge which we are facing right now is in terms of testing facilities in, you can say, South African context, because we have limited, you can say, resources. So that's what we acquired a grant in which we built a relationship with the University of Granada. And yes, that works. And Ms. Loke has visited for 3 months, and it was very easy to do all those tests because of their facilities. So yes, such facilities can be initiated, and then the industrial partners can support us in those facilities. So that is what I'm looking forward. That is a challenge which we are facing right now in terms of high-end testings. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you. Thank you for your contribution. And in terms of issues in terms of application, from the research to application, an interesting question always arises in the work that we do is that how do you foresee the work that you're doing now being applicable? For example, if we look at old buildings within the Boerkaap area here in Cape Town, where, for example, a couple of years ago, a building was damaged due to issues around construction next door to an old building, and basically the building got destroyed inadvertently. How do you see your work and research relating to industry as a whole? Thank you.
Vani, I already mentioned in previous, because I told you whenever some construction, there should be some legislation and other aspect which needs to be there in order to restrict construction around this heritage site. So I think these are beyond our capacity. We can just assess the structures, like in order to know whether what is the present situation or condition of the structures, and we can recommend that how this structure is going to behave. But yes, definitely, in terms of some legislation must be there in order to restrict or in order to take precautions or measures while constructing something close to the heritage site or heritage buildings. This is what I can suggest. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pallav. I just needed it reiterated. Thank you. The reason I wanted to reiterate it was because to highlight the issues that we also face as the legislative authority, in that without your input and without your engagement, wouldn't be able to keep up to date with the issues that are relevant both for industry as well as the research component, which is what you're part of. Next speaker is Mapole Loke to supplement the discussion. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Pallav.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Butabani. My name is Mapole Luke. I'm a PhD student at Cape Peninsula University of Technology. My research is based on the design and development of restoration mortars for the Castle of Good Hope and the buildings on Robben Island. So this is an overview of my presentation. I'll be taking us through sustainable conservation management as SAHRA views it, and as us as CPUT come into the picture, and then the research that we have done on heritage conservation and some case studies that we have worked on as CPUT as a whole, and some of the great achievements that we have achieved since we started this journey. So basically, sustainable conservation management involves the social sustainability, environmental sustainability, and economic sustainability, while all working together towards sustainable development. So how does now research come into this picture? As CPUT or as researchers from Cape Peninsula University of Technology fit into this picture in all these ways. So for example, the heritage buildings that we are working on are social, they increase social sustainability, they increase economic sustainability in a way that their long-term existence contributes towards travel and tourism, which is a source of revenue for the country, and also the environmental sustainability. So moving on to now who plays part into the sustainable conservation management. It is, according to some research done, it shows that this is not an isolated topic. It involves all stakeholders. We're talking about historians, heritage professionals, engineers being either civil or structural, architects, archaeologists, environmentalists, geologists, scientists being chemists and others, industries, which is the material manufacturers, the standard setting bodies, and the communities. Just a brief background. When I started this journey, I remember when I had to go do some interviews with some stakeholders, everyone will be surprised as to how do you now get involved with heritage? Are you now a historian or what's going on? This means there's still lack of knowledge when it comes to who plays part in heritage conservation. So we are trying to spread the word, make everyone aware that we are all involved. That's why I included communities here, because we can all preserve our heritage, but if there's vandalism, if there's theft, if there's that, then we are just not doing what we wish to do. So in addressing sustainability, we are on a collaboration and partnership journey. Us as CPUT have signed a memorandum of understanding with SAHRA. We are also working with the Green Building Council of South Africa, the Cultural Heritage Agency of the Netherlands, and the UCT, University of Cape Town. And recently we have formed another collaboration with the University of Granada in Spain. We are also working with the South African Institute of Heritage Science and Conservation. So from all these partners, as we can see, there's still a lag from that list I just indicated previously. We still need the industries, people who produce these materials, people who sell these materials that we need for restoring our heritage or conserving our heritage. We still need contribution from architects, we still need contribution from scientists, and etc., etc. So this shows that, yes, we are a step into the right direction, but there's still more to be done in terms of involving all stakeholders into the conservation of our heritage. So thus far, CPUT started this journey in 2018, whereby the first research that was done was on the standard protocol for restoring heritage cementing materials, whereby we were trying to say, yes, there's the NARA Act, which indicates that any alterations on heritage buildings has to be monitored, and it's monitored by SAHRA. But do the other stakeholders know about a procedure or a sort of a standard protocol to be followed then when restoration work has to be executed on these buildings? So that was the first research that was completed. It's available online for public consumption. And the other research that was done by another student from CPUT was the deformation monitoring of heritage structures. And the ongoing work was, yes, at first we have outlined the standard protocol for restoring heritage mortars, but now we have to know the procedure of designing now. Now we're bringing what Butovani talked about as to applicability of our research. So after outlining the standard protocol now, let's go further into now designing and developing these mortars. So we are bringing whatever research we have done, either theoretical, so we're bringing it into practice now by designing and developing such mortars. We have also done some finite element model of the masonries. So some of the heritage sites that we have worked on and are still working on are the buildings on Robben Island and the Castle of Good Hope, the Dar Josaphat, and the South African Astronomical Observatory. And some survey work was done on the Bokap area. So this collaboration has indeed been of use because this is the actual projects that SAHRA need assistance with when it comes to research. So we're doing this research into to address the sustainability part of our heritage. So some great achievements thus far. We managed to, in collaboration and by the assistance of SAHRA, we managed to secure a funding from the African World Heritage Fund through the Moses Mapesa research grant. This grant shows that, yes, what we're doing might be small at the moment, but we are definitely heading to bigger heights. In so saying, I mean, if the African World Heritage Fund could see that there's potential in our research, it shows us that we are doing something not just for South Africa as an isolation, but for Africa as a whole and ultimately for the world. So another great achievement is as we are trying to involve all the stakeholders into understanding and seeing that heritage conservation is not just for historians, not just for historians, archaeologists, and so on. We are trying to involve everyone. So we are spreading the work through publication of articles. So we have approached the South African Institution of Civil Engineering, whereby we are saying, let's all bring hands together into conserving our heritage through all walks, through all departments. So this is one of the greatest achievements. We are drawing people's attention into contributing towards this. So in the spirit of heritage, let me say thank you, Dakenza, Danke, Galibocha, Nyabonga, Nkosi, and yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mapole. Thank you very much for that. That was a great presentation, which takes an overview of both the work that you are involved in, as well as the broad spectrum by which you are located in terms of not only in Southern Africa, but also internationally. I'd like to take on questions from anyone who's available. Thank you. Was that Flavia? Francois, was there a question? Francois, was there a question? Sorry, we can't hear you.
No, not really. I was just testing my camera. Thank you very much. And I must say, this is fascinating work that is being done. And it really shows that how we can bring professionals in the built environment much closer to the heritage aspects of it. And I think that these sort of collaborations are such importance.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. I'll just, in terms of time, I would like to move on to our next speakers who are part of the unit, the Built Environment Unit. And it's Ms. Palmara de Almeida, and her topic will be building reuse, redevelopment, and redesign. Palmara considers herself an urbanist and a heritage professional with a particular interest in urban development, which promotes sustainable and socioeconomic and environmentally sensitive activities, whilst preserving and leveraging culture and built heritage to meet the evolving contemporary urban needs. She previously worked as a project officer at a local think tank called the Sandler Institute, specializing in incremental informal settlement upgrading and good governance. Her academic background consists of a BSc in Environmental Geographical Sciences and Archaeology, as well as a master's in city and regional planning. She is currently also a member of the Built Environment Unit here at SAHRA as a Heritage Officer. I'll hand over to Palmara Dialmeida. Thank you.
Thank you, Tabani, for that wonderful introduction. Good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to present on this topic of adaptive reuse and redevelopment. Sorry, let me just share my screen quickly. Give me a moment. Okay. So I just wanted to say that it is a pleasure for me to present on this topic on adaptive reuse, redevelopment, and redesign. It's an emerging passion for me, as well as the Built Environment Unit, and it is a global phenomenon at the moment. So it's a really, really good topic to delve into. So today I just wanted to touch on a couple of things when it comes to adaptive reuse. Here's my table of contents. I'll start off with an introduction of the Built Environment Unit, who we are and what we do. Then I'll move on to the concept of adaptive reuse, redevelopment, and redesign, and its purpose and its role in heritage conservation and management, as well as its using adaptive reuse as a bridge towards sustainability in built heritage. Then I will swiftly touch on challenges when it comes to adaptive reuse of heritage buildings. And I'll also touch on some case studies as well that have been successful around the world. And then I will kind of conclude and finish off with areas of interest and further research. Okay. So who are we as the Built Environment Unit of SAHRA, and what do we do? We fall under the Heritage Conservation Management banner and form part of SAHRA's core business under the broader umbrella of Heritage Resources Management. We primarily focus on enforcing and implementing the NORA in terms of built heritage. We are mandated to identify, to conserve, and manage national heritage sites. Built heritage is mainly classified as buildings and structures with historical and cultural significance, historical settlements and townscapes, landscapes of cultural significance, and sites associated with living heritage. The concept and purpose of adaptive reuse, redevelopment, and redesign. Here we go. Adaptive reuse of heritage buildings is fundamentally aims to preserve the value and significance of a heritage building while adapting it to present use and transforming it for future use. This quote from Warren Kerr nicely encapsulates the concept and the purpose of adaptive reuse, saying that preserving our past, building our future highlights how built heritage can be conserved through the successful marriage of existing heritage structures and cutting-edge architectural design. The best way to preserve our heritage structures is to give them a sympathetic new reuse. So adaptive reuse provides an opportunity to adapt heritage buildings to meet contemporary and future socioeconomic and cultural needs. The most successful built heritage adaptive reuse projects are those who respect and retain the building's heritage integrity and adds a contemporary layer that provides value for the future. Sometimes adaptive reuse is the only way that the building's fabric will be properly cared for and maintained. Cultural heritage is a key driver for urban renewal all around the world. And urban renewal may occur through functional use and reuse of historical buildings and sites and streetscapes. This also means this means of adaptive reuse can create and strengthen the identity of a community, of a nation, and enhance public well-being and social inclusion. The role of adaptive reuse in heritage conservation and management. The process of adaptive reuse is very complex. The complexity is even greater in relation to heritage buildings because of the cultural and historical significance, the sheer number of stakeholders involved, and the varied intentions and interests that these stakeholders have. Taking on a project of this nature needs to take into account considerations of community engagement, neighborhood, local, and regional spatial planning, engineering services, whilst drilling down to the building scale of the project. It requires immense critical and creative thinking and innovation. The ICOMOS Borough Charter hunts adaptive reuse as a strategy towards the conservation of heritage buildings, which sustains heritage value by enhancing its functionality and usefulness for the future. The UNESCO recommendation of historic urban landscapes mentions that adaptive reuse is the implementation of conservation through transformation, which highlights the effective management of contemporary and future changes in historic urban areas. This approach to development and to conservation of heritage allows us to use a painful past to address current and emerging issues that we see in our urban environments. Therefore, allowing a country such as South Africa to acknowledge the painful past, to heal through leveraging heritage assets to address some of our legacy issues we face today, whilst building towards a common, a diverse but also common identity that truly encapsulates Ubuntu and a rainbow nation that we so pride ourselves on. So the role that the reuse in the bid towards sustainability, in pursuit of sustainable development, built heritage is a vital plays a vital role through the adaptive reuse of historical buildings, because it extends the building's life. It minimizes the demolition waste. It encourages the reuse of embodied energy, as well as provides significant social and economic benefits to the society, thus embracing different dimensions of sustainability. Adaptive reuse can be used as a catalyst for the revitalization of neighborhoods by preserving historic architecture, creating new housing and mixed-use opportunities, and increasing public safety. According to the City of Los Angeles Handbook, it is believed to lead to significant economic growth through a phenomenon known as prosperity through preservation. So what is a heritage building? It is a building with cultural significance, being of aesthetic, architectural, historic, scientific, social, and spiritual, linguistic, or technological value or significance. And in South Africa, buildings that are 60 years and older are also considered heritage buildings. Why is this so important? Well, it's really important to note that because in South Africa, buildings which are 60 years and older are considered heritage buildings, and are governed by the NARA, it means a substantial amount of existing buildings and existing building stock is going to be considered heritage in the near future. And if we do not find a way to incentivize public and private sector to conserve heritage and leverage built heritage to meet social economic needs, we run the risk of ending up with buildings that nobody wants to touch, that are deteriorating instead of playing a role in building a resilient urban environment and promoting sustainability. The other possibility, if no action is taken, is that we create white elephants that look pretty, but play no significant role in the functioning of the built environment. Examples and challenges of adaptive reuse. So here are some wonderful examples of successful adaptive reuse projects. My favorite, the Zeitz MOCA, so the Zeitz Museum of Contemporary Art, African Art, in Cape Town. It is a historical grain silo complex that was repurposed to a contemporary art museum. The studio carved out a world-class art museum out of 116 giant concrete tubes that make up the grain silo complex. Through adaptive reuse, they created 9 floors, approximately 9,500 square meters of space, which includes a rooftop sculpture garden, a restaurant, and reading rooms. And the top of the building is also home to the Silo Hotel. Then the next one is the Convent de Saint I cannot pronounce that name, but yes, found in Spain. This convent was a complex that was built in the 18th century. It then includes a renovated church, which was built between 1721 and 1729. And the renovation of the church, in 2000, the convent, which was in a state of ruins, was demolished by the state. Only the church and the perimeter wall remained, but in very poor conditions. So they commissioned work on the church and the surrounding of the church in 2003 through a two-phased approach, which allowed the building to be redesigned to accommodate an auditorium in a multi-purpose cultural space. There's a third stage that is planned for the future, which is meant to allow the upper floors of the chapel to be used as a historical archive. The next one is Surrey Hills apartment project, where a warehouse, a popular historical building in Australia, Sydney, was converted into apartment blocks through adaptive reuse. The architecture firm commission managed to bring life to this historical building by focusing on sustainability as their main priority. Most of the building utilizes recycled materials while embracing the layers of history that enrich the interiors by creating a finished apartment that is deemed calm, livable, and welcoming. So, even though adaptive reuse is seen as an effective approach to conservation and sustainable development, it remains a challenging undertaking for the built environment and urban heritage professionals. And if botched, it can result in the loss of heritage sites as well as the destruction of heritage significance. So it needs to be undertaken with great sensitivity and understanding of historical buildings and built heritage. So some of the challenges that I identified, there are definitely more than these, was physical restriction in terms of the structural layout of a building and the soundness of the actual building. Social considerations, which is managing expectations, intangible and non-economic perspectives of communities and individuals who are directly linked to the building and its significance, economics considerations, indirect costs, and unintended costs of conservation and the management of the site, non-availability of material. This is a major issue and is incredibly important, but is often overlooked. That's why it's very important. The work that Dr. Pallav and Ms. Loke are doing is incredibly important because it allows us to use a replica of existing material in order to basically extend the life cycle of a building and create longevity for historical buildings. Many built environment professionals are also not well versed in adaptive reuse and working with heritage buildings in particular. So the next one is complexity and technical difficulties. Innovation is required in terms of refurbishment techniques and retrofitting solution. Commercial risk and uncertainty. Redesigning and redeveloping a heritage building is often lengthy and a tedious process which can lead to profit loss. Inaccuracy of building information and drawings, the lack of accurate information on a building, its defects, building plans, material analysis, records of the materials that were used over its life cycle, and historical building technologies used provides difficulty for any built environment professional to actually start to redevelop a building of this nature. And then building regulations, heritage, and other relevant legislation. Requirements of complying with all of these building codes, regulations, heritage legislation, conservation guidelines, and planning requirements can be a mammoth task for developers, and they'd just rather stay away. Low appetite of private sector and reluctancy to invest in heritage buildings is due to all the legal red tape that I spoke about in the above point. So areas of interest and further research. I'm not going to delve deeply into each area just because each one of these areas is a presentation on itself, but the BU is very interested in research on market appeal and commercial viability of adaptive reuse for heritage buildings, building information modeling opportunities for basically creating databases for existing buildings, which is something that I don't think a lot of people have actually managed to do. Looking at governmental incentives to actually incentivize private sector to get involved in the redevelopment and conservation of our heritage buildings, and then the social and ESG and adaptive reuse of both heritage, and then adaptive reuse of heritage buildings, best practice that we've seen around the world, but also what applies to a South African context. I just want to say thank you very much, and I conclude by saying the greenest building is the one that already exists. Thank you for your attention, and thank you for listening to my presentation. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask.
Thank you, Palmyra. Next up, first I'd like to apologize for skipping a speaker earlier. We'd like to welcome Dr. Francois Veruli from the University of Cape Town. Professor Francois Veruli is a well-known South African property economist and a professor in property economics, property investment, and property finance. He is a property economist with over 20 years' experience in the analysis of the South African property market. At present, he lectures in the Urban Economics, Property Development and Portfolio Management at the University of Cape Town in the School of Construction, Economics and Management. Francois previously held the position of Chief Economist at the Chamber of Mines. He was also the head of research at JHI Professional Services, Valuations, Research and Legal Services, and more recently, head of the School of Construction Economics and Management at the University of Witwatersrand. He is a fellow of RICS, Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, past president and now the executive director of the African Real Estate Society, and is the acting chair of the Ethics and Research Committee, Faculty of Engineering and the Built Environment at the University of Cape Town. He is a non-executive director of the Accelerate Property Fund and also acts as an expert witness in property-related cases. Professor Veruli has undertaken extensive research into the South African property cycle, the development of township commercial properties, and the application of institutional economics to the analysis of property markets in emerging countries. He engages with citizens, scholars, and industry leaders, increase the discourse and share knowledge related to property. Thank you very much for joining us, Professor.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
Ben, I think you can hear me?
We can hear you, thank you.
And that my presentation is up, I hope.
Yes, it is, thank you.
Excellent, excellent. And thank you very much for inviting me of this great initiative. And it's so good also to see. Can you hear me?
Yes, you
Hello?
are audible. Thank you.
Okay, I said that there was an echo, and I wasn't sure what was happening there. And it's so good to see the relationship building up between the professionals in the built environment and the property market. What I hope to do in the few minutes that I have is, and I'm very glad that the presentation happened before mine, it actually works perfectly, because I think that some of the issues that I will be dealing are exactly the issues of the adaptive reuse of buildings as well. What I'd like to start with is say that our built environment has seen an evolution over decades and centuries, from an agrarian economies to the digital economy that we have. And each of these revolutions, if we can call it first, second, third, and fourth, has given us a particular type of built environment. And much of that built environment is still with us in one form or the other. And I think we always have to be reminded that what we add as new buildings every year is a very small proportion of the built environment that we deal with. In fact, if we look at the environmental issues, we always have to remember that about 80 to 90% of buildings that will be with us in 2030 or even 2050 have already been built. So if we're going to play a meaningful role in global CO2 emissions and climate control, a focus on new buildings is not going to get us there, nowhere close to it. We need to focus on existing buildings. And that goes without saying that heritage buildings will form an integral part of that. So I think the point has already, the point has already been made, and I saw it in one of the previous presentations, that much of the discussions around green buildings have been focused on the operational side of the building. And if we talk of ESG, much of the focus has been on E instead of S and G. And I would like to propose to you in this presentation that in an emerging country like us, S has to be given its rightful position. And I would even argue that unless we get social issues right, the S right, our chance of getting a buy-in on the environmental issues diminishes considerably. As I've said more critically, we can have the greenest building with solar and everything on top, but if we don't handle the S, those buildings will not be given their social value. Communities give social value to buildings and respond to them accordingly. And so some of the work that we will be undertaking with SAHRA, with the MOU that we have at the moment, is focused on looking at the critical social values that heritage buildings have in South Africa. I would like just to touch on the presentation that was just given. I don't want to repeat it, but any building has got an embodied, the energy that goes into the building, the steel, the cement, operational, and then the end of life. In other words, until we move into a circular economy, we end up with an economy where everything ends up in the landfill. And we know that that is not sustainable. We're also understanding that the built environment is responsible for about 40% of CO2 emissions globally, of which the embodied role can play up to half that amount. So the big issue we have is not only saying, looking at a building, I suppose my proposition to you, and I think it's no news for those involved, is that the green, as the presentation that was just finished made the point, the greenest buildings are buildings that are already there. So if we're going to be serious about green buildings in South Africa, we need to be serious about heritage buildings and the existing built environment. In fact, there are studies showing that an older building, a heritage building, needs to have an improvement of about 20% in its energy usage, and it will beat a brand new, spanky new green building in decentralized nodes. I'm just going to skip here a bit. The other issue is that there's an opportunity as well coming through. There is growing focus on companies to show what they are doing in the sustainability environment. We're starting to see non-financial disclosures becoming of greater importance. The JSE is putting also a climate disclosure guidance through. And so I think we're starting to see this growing. The Urban Land Institute, and this comes to the crux of what I'd like to discuss, the Urban Land Institute in the United States and other players have started asking, how do we push up the S of ESG? How do we make sure that the buildings that we have start playing their social role. That means access, parks around them. In other words, supporting the hood. Do our buildings support the hood? Does it give meaning to the hood? Does it improve? Or do we plonk a building there and say, well, you know, as long as the NOI, the return is sufficient, that is enough. So I think that that focus is growing in importance. Now, you're all aware of, on the one hand, we have the SDGs and the ESG. The important difference is that the SDGs are about impact. And the question we need to ask ourselves, and this is the work that we would like to do with SAHRA, Ben, Devon, and the whole and the team, to see how we link our buildings, heritage buildings, in meeting the Sustainable Development Goals in particular. There are many benchmarks around the world at the moment, and they all do different things. And I think one of the best ones that we have actually is the SDGs. And of course, there's 17 of them. Automatically, one can say that a heritage building has a role to play in any of these 17. It has a role to play, and I'm not going to go through all 17 of them, but the critical one that the built environment deals with is 11, sustainable cities and communities. And I think this is where it becomes important, that we have governments signing up to the SDGs, and we have to start asking ourselves, how do we play our role in meeting the targets of especially SDG 11? To do ESG and SDGs, I think there's more acronyms in this game than anything, play a role. And you will start seeing that, especially if buildings are going to play a role on 11, and in particular the social role, we have to ask ourselves, how do heritage buildings play a role in reducing poverty, hunger, health, education, gender equality, clean water, decent work, industry, innovation and management, how we manage our buildings, reduce inequalities, and so forth. I'm not going to go through all of them, but as you start seeing, we have an opportunity here to start asking ourselves how these buildings respond to these. So this is the work that we want to do. If we focus on SDG 11, as I said, which we would like to target in particular, there are quite a number of SDGs on the left that talk to it, which indirectly affect or influence SDG 11 and the relevant targets on the right. So in looking at creating a framework, we're still in the early phase of this, but this is one route that we could go down to. So how could we structure some of the works? Is first understand the context of heritage buildings, where the role that they play, and then try to carefully look at buildings and try to understand their role in broader society. And that could also be the avoidance of urban decay. I've often been critical that, you know, if a company puts a nice green building out of town and strands or abandons its older buildings, which could be a heritage building, yes, you're picking it up on the green bit on the new building, but you're losing out on the S because you have played in that respect a role in promoting in resulting urban decay. So I think it becomes important for investors who are invested in heritage buildings and other to find the correct balance. And I think this is one of the things that we would like to look at. And then we want to look at the importance of these roles, test against standards, and there are quite a number of standards, and I think we've heard some of the standards this morning as well, which are more technical standards. But I think the exciting work that we want to get involved with is to see some of the social standards, and finally come out with reports that will look at this. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to leave it at that. Thank you very much. And of course, as the University of Cape Town, we are delighted to be in engaged research with SAHRA. We also believe that I think we can undertake some interesting new work, which maybe hasn't been done, which is also new to the private sector and others. I think it becomes equally important that when we start looking at incentives, whether it's urban development zones and others, that we take cognizance of the importance of existing buildings and that we avoid a focus completely on new buildings, on standards of new buildings, and that we start looking at benchmarking the importance of existing buildings to look at their environmental impact, social impact, and of course the governance of ESG. And I think that we could do some exciting work then is to bring out the social importance of heritage buildings in our built environment and hopefully play a role in meeting the Sustainability Development Goals set by UN Habitat. Ben, thank you very much. I think that is my presentation.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you very much for opening up the dialogue around heritage as well as economics of building, and also the broader debate around the material culture that we are engaged with every day. In order for time to be kept, I would like to request a change in questions being fielded right now and to go on to the next speaker. The next speaker is Mr. Keenan Africa, a historian with an interest in the role that heritage plays as a function of memory through various heritage resources. His academic background is in history, and he has an honors and a master's in history at the University of the Western Cape, with his master's thesis focusing on belonging, identity, and its relation to housing crisis in Cape Town. I'd like to welcome Mr. Keenan Africa, a member of the South African Heritage Resources Agency Built Environment Unit. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. Just going to share my screen. Good morning. Today I'll be talking about contentious heritage, particularly that which is represented and experienced through statues and memorials. As outlined in the contents, my presentation will focus on the ways that heritage is defined and therefore how it functions, the purpose that statues and memorials serve, and why it is that some are viewed as contentious, and concluding with the approaches that can be taken towards statues and memorials that are viewed as contentious. Background. There has been a change in the awareness of what is to be acknowledged in public spaces, therefore a reflection on what is deemed heritage. Although instances of contestation towards statues and memorials have occurred throughout history, particularly at the turn of revolutions, a key focal point here today is that of the Rhodes Must Fall movement. From this movement in 2015, there has been a culmination over the years for statues to be removed, relocated, or acts of vandalism towards them, as they no longer reflect the heritage of South Africa. To name a few, besides Rhodes, there's been the Steyn statue at Free State University, Paul Kruger statue in Pretoria, the Louis Botha statue at Parliament, and the King George V statue at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Added to that is a disproportionate representation of monuments that do not speak to South Africa's demographics. In saying that they no longer represent our heritage, there has to be an understanding of what heritage is. At SAHRA, what we do revolves around heritage. It's in the name. SAHRA identifies places with qualities so exceptional that they are of special national significance in terms of the heritage assessment criteria set out in the National Heritage Resources Act. These are resources that are identified to have exceptional values and proven to have a profound influence on South Africa's history and development. SAHRA therefore focuses on recognizing heritage resources that are of significance and also including their promotion and conservation. There is no denying that heritage is about the nation. Heritage resources become landmarks of a nation based on their significance to a past and history that in turn promote nation building. It is an interpretation of a nation through recognized resources that obtain the status of being significant. In her book, Uses of Heritage, Laura Jane Smith analyzes this understanding and view of heritage that is enamored with monumentality and grand scale, innate artifact site significance, tied to time depth, scientific aesthetic expert judgment, social consensus, and nation building as the authorized heritage discourse. The authorized heritage discourse is focused on the promotion of material culture to manifest a common sense of identity. Heritage, therefore, becomes a static object or resources that preserves a narrative and meaning around which a national identity can be constructed. Her view of heritage, however, is not the object itself, such as the heritage resources. Rather, heritage is intangible. Heritage is a moment or a process of reconstructing cultural and social values and meanings. Beyond being significant, heritage is a process in which meaning and value is found in relation to. Laura Jane Smith further argues that heritage occurs in the way visitors engage or disengage with a thing, and stresses the importance that heritage is not the historic monument, but rather the activities that occur at and around these places and objects. It can be the underlying narratives that is evoked from an object's past and how that may influence an individual's views and feelings in the present. As per Section 2 of the NARA, public monuments and memorials means all monuments and memorials that are erected on land belonging to any branch of central, provincial, or local government, or on land belonging to any organization funded by or established in terms of the legislation of such a branch of government, or B, which were paid for by public subscription, government funds, or public spirited or military organization, and are on land belonging to any private individual. These statues, memorials, or monuments are material artifacts that are set up in public spaces, and most importantly, their intentions are commemorative. They pay homage to figures, which are mostly men, that are viewed as important and shaped our history. Sabine Marshall, I'm apologizing if I did not pronounce it correctly, but in her book, In Landscape of Memory, she argues that the role is to induce purposeful remembrance in the interest of forging a particular historical consciousness and shaping collective memory upon which group identity can be based. Commemorations are built around memory, and more importantly, collective memory and instilling it. Collective memory that is concerned with history of a nation serves as a narrative upon which the nation's story is reflected. However, what happens when that narrative no longer serves the collective memory? The South African landscape and narrative is no longer limiting itself to solely reflecting statues that honor white leaders, war memorials paying tribute to white combatants in various local and international conflicts, and the numerous public monuments commemorating the heroic victories, events, and achievements of white colonial settlers and officials. South Africa has to now reflect and commemorate the shared identities of all South Africans, while also celebrating the unique and significant values of a diverse range of cultural groups. In analyzing the growing discontent towards statues and memorials of a past era, their physical place becomes important, as these statues and memorials are in prominent spaces situated around South Africa to further ingrain their status. The question of inclusivity of place is an important one based on South Africa's past of apartheid spatial planning and forced removals. And these statues and memorials can be perceived as symbols of that history. It can be argued that these statues and memorials are contentious as the context in which they now exist creates tension, as they are a reminder of the exclusion that people experienced and still do experience to this day. They have a visible effect as symbols that evoke histories of displacement, of the violence of racism, apartheid, and colonialism. These statues and memorials, as much as they represent and evoke a particular feeling, they are bookmarks in the extensive history of South Africa. As highlighted earlier through Laura Jane Smith analysis, the cultural process and engagement is heritage. We should acknowledge that as much as our aim is reconciliation, we should not shy away from contestation. The engagement that is happening at and with these statues and memorials is heritage, and it is one of contestation over place, representation, and much more to each individual or collective group. The approaches that can be taken towards these contentious statues is represented as reactive and proactive. Reactive being responsive to a situation and not in control, and proactive coming from a more controlled standpoint. One such example is the relocation of the Hetziach statue at the Union Buildings to make way for the statue of Nelson Mandela. And based on newspaper reports, there was consultation done with the Hetziach family before the relocation. And so if we go through the list of reactive and proactive, reactive would be there's a long delay in actioning the request for removal, proactive being action soon after request, reactive being state-driven, citizen-driven, and proactive being state-driven. There's a long list and I will, apologies, not go through all of it. But the position of SAHRA with regards to its approach regarding the removal of statues and memorials go as follows. Heritage must be inclusive and speak to the shared identities of all South Africans while also celebrating the unique and significant values of a diverse range of cultural groups. Monuments and statues are to be used as both the means to celebrate our collective heritage and identities, as well as to educate current and future generations about our past. The relocation and erection of statues and monuments should follow specific guidelines and procedures as prescribed by the NARA and any other applicable legislation. Emphasis should be placed on public engagement and participation to allow affected communities and interest groups to take ownership of processes. SAHRA as a national body aims to facilitate social cohesion through preserving our painful past as well as celebrating our promising future, and therefore SAHRA subscribes to the responsible and engaging processes that are prescribed by the NARA in order to determine the location of current and future statues and monuments. In concluding, heritage can and will mean many things to different people. Do we want these statues and memorials in prominent places in a context that is no longer aligned with the collective and shared memory and identity of South Africa? Should they be relocated to a different place, like a museum, and placed with other contentious statues and memorials? Do we install new statues and memorials to reflect on the majority of South Africa that has been alienated through statues and memorials alongside contentious ones as a sign, as a symbol of reconciliation? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Africa, and thank you, Keenan. That was a very thorough presentation. And in the sake of time, I'd like to go on to our next speaker, Mr. Calvin Gilfallen. We'll be projecting from our side the presentation we'll be making on the Camisa Museum. Mr. Calvin Gilfallen is one of the country's foremost experts in tourism and heritage sector, with over 31 years of experience in cultural tourism, training, tourism research, marketing, consulting, and public administration, and strategic planning and governance. He is the current chief executive of the Castle Control Board, the body that manages South Africa's oldest colonial building, the Castle of Good Hope. Under his leadership, the image of the Castle of Good Hope is being transformed from a bastion of armed colonial conquest and apartheid oppression into a symbol of inclusion, into a symbol of inclusion, education, healing, and nation building. After completion of a BA honors degree in geography and environmental studies at the University of Western Cape, in 1984, he joined UWC as a junior lecturer and researcher in February of 1985. While lecturing, he completed his master's degree in geography and environmental studies at UWC in 1991. His full research thesis is titled The Socio-Economic, Cultural, and Morphological Impact of Tourism and Historic Mission Stations in the Western Cape, Genadendal, Elam, and Wuppertal. In 2000, he left UWC to take up a challenging but rewarding post as Director of Tourism Development in Mpumalanga Province. After that, he joined the Western Cape Destination Marketing Organization as Executive Manager from 2004 to 2007, and then as Chief Executive from 2007 to 2012. Gilfallen is very active in social movement in his hometown of Paarl and has served in various capacities on an array of community-based civic organizations. Besides Gilfallen's many public opinion pieces on contemporary heritage debates, he also regularly shares his expertise and experience on formal, national, and international platforms. I will add the biography and also into the chat box later. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome Mr. Calvin Gilfallen. Just tell him to switch off his camera. Calvin, can't hear you, unfortunately. You can switch off your camera.
I'll switch it off now.
Thank you.
Can you now?
We can hear you now. Yeah, it's better now. Thank you. We'll project the, yeah.
So thank you so much, and thanks for the introduction. Half of it I didn't hear, but I said no by heart. And apologies. Interruption. But Keenan, thank you, Keenan. I've heard most of your informative presentation, so it also saves me time to go through all of it. My talk briefly, Chairperson and honorable colleagues, fellow sapiens, fellow heritage workers, museologists, and opinion makers, is about the question of who am I, where do I come from, and where do I go to? It's a question that's not confronting me as an individual, but also something with which I confronted with on a daily basis when I engage people from all walks of life between the five walls of the Castle of Good Hope. And I hope Tobani has given a brief introduction of where I'm coming from. As I say, I missed that. So mine is about the question of identity. So it's about an abstract concept, but it informs so much of what we are doing. It informs so much of what is happening around the world, whether it is in Syria, whether it's in Palestine, Israel, whether it's in Crimea, whether it's in Russia, whether it's in America, but it's particularly on our African continent. And my focus is on a particular type of identity, and some may call it, false consciousness, whatever, but it is so-called, or what the apartheid regime called the colored identity. And every 4 years or so, it comes up heavily when parties contest for elections. And so what we are trying to do with the castle, and what a team of people are trying to do with the castle, is to find a place where people who are wrestling and identity, and we call them the Camisa Africans, where they could find a place where they could find not only information, but a sense of place and space to deal with that notion in their heads. So quickly for the people, if there are international viewers or participants also on this platform, is that Camisa is a Khoi word that means the place of sweet water. That's very roughly, because you can't have one-on-one translations when you deal with such an old and ancient language. We understand that even in my mother tongue, Afrikaans, to English, it's difficult to translate because every culture has its own language. But it broadly means sweet water, and it's a metaphor. The past 10 years that I'm working at
at the Castle of Good Hope, who, by the way, is the oldest surviving colonial citadel building that perhaps represents symbolically armed colonial conquest, the destruction of culture, the destruction of identity in South Africa or on the Southern African continent. So we use the metaphor of the sweet waters in a lot of the work that we are doing. And the Camissa Museum Project, which is actually a misnomer because it's actually, the full name is the Camissa African Center for Restorative Memory, because we call people who are wrestling with identity here to reflect on, on where they're coming from, where they are, and where they're going to. And in my title that I sent on to you, Sarah, dear Sarah, colleagues, I explained why, if we want to restore memory, if we want to restore pride, if we want to restore dignity, if we want to undo some of the injustices of over 400 years of armed colonial conquest and apartheid, then we need to go to the source. And the source of the problem is we need to unmake the traditional historiography. Then we need to deconstruct history as we know it. We need to almost explode the lies. And my colleague Patrick Tariq Mallet, who wrote the book The Lie of 1652, there are more than one lie that needs to be exploded in order for us to move forward, to understand where the Camissa Africans find themselves and where they are going to. Now, a little bit more of the project, and some of you are aware of this, that about 30, 40 years ago, in one of the liberation movements, the issue of identity and the national question, what is this national issue, the makeup of the national question, and the word African, and because in the African national context, they were talking about the African majority, the colored, the Indian, and the white. And some of the freedom fighters, the cadres in the movement, was not very happy with that, because it is built on a false notion of history, that very same history that I said we should explode, the myth that we explode if we want to move forward. And so the concept of the Camissa Museum was born. And eventually, COVID-19 came a couple of years back, and we had a time to get all the gray heads together. Our ambassador in Benin, Ruby Marks, Angus, Patrick that I mentioned, and we say Castle is the most appropriate spot, focal point, to deal with this issue of and all these falls and 7 streams of people all around the globe coming together in the southernmost part of African and forming this. And that includes indigenous African people, Khoi, San, people from other parts of Africa, people from Europe, people from the East, people from the West, all over the world, forming this thing this concept that people refer to as colored, and that we call the Camissa people of South Africa. So that is where we are. So last year, in 2021, in March, because of COVID, we couldn't do physical work. We've launched the online museum, and that was also a first. It's the first that there's nothing in reality, there's no tangible thing in space and time, but because of online, because of this virtual world that I still grapple to understand. I'm not even sure if you.
Sorry, Calvin, we've missed that.
Yes, I'm back now. I can hear. I see what is. I think it's on my side. Can you hear me now, gentlemen?
Yes, we can. Thank you very much.
Let me conclude. Otherwise, because I rather, people rather.
The chat room, or if there's question done. So we've launched this virtual museum, and you can go into that www.camissamuseum.co.za. And in March this year, we've sort of completed half of the, with Dutch funding, with the former colonial funding. We're glad to know the debates that we have about and restoration of memory, restorative justice are reaching the so-called powers that be, the four colonial powers. And so they've funded the first half of the physical museum, and could be visited. And we've received a lot of debates, a lot of school groups using that resource when they're dealing with the question of identity. So let me rather stop there, because I don't want to go deeper, to say that somehow we need to recognize the basis of the Commercial Museum is that all life, all biological life, all human life, all intelligent life, all civilization started on the African continent, and the Camissa African people, very much part and parcel, especially the earlier San people in their genetic makeup, is very much part of whatever we say. So if Elon Musk goes to Mars, we mustn't think that this is a American Western thing. The basis of that to be found in Kemet, in the Sterkfontein caves, in Mali, in Nubia. So that is the basis, the basic curatorial philosophy on which the Camissa Africans is built. Thank you so much, Chairperson. And I hope some of that was audible. It's really, I'm apologizing for the lack of technological savvy in the environment that we're in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gilfallen, and that was an enlightening presentation. We'll play a short video just to supplement what you were saying. Also, I'd like to invite everyone in the audience and at large to basically explore the website. It's a Camissa, www.camissamuseum.co.za. And I welcome everyone to have a look at the website and engage. And at this juncture, I'd like to open a little video explaining some of what Calvin has said. Thank you. Thank you very much.
as a traveling curator, I come across many stories which have not been told before. The ones that interest me the most are the ones in the context of slavery, colonialism, and apartheid.
Thank you. That was a small little snippet on the video on the website, on the landing page of the Camisa Museum. As we have concluded, and also with load shedding and everything else, unfortunately, we haven't been able to reach all the questions that were posed by our participants. However, the email address is on the chat box of every participant, so you can field questions directly to them. I'd like to thank you again for taking the time to be with us this morning, and I wish you a very good Heritage Month. And I'd like to also, on behalf of all of you, to thank the wonderful speakers that have broadened both our understanding of heritage conservation in the built environment. And I'd like to welcome my executive, Ms. Mama Komareng Kasi Lesuana, who's my executive of South African Heritage Resources Agency. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Giovanni.
Yes?
And Chair,
Yes?
I will be doing the conclusion on behalf of Komi. She's not available at the moment. I just want to first and foremost repeat what you said. I want to thank the guest speakers from CPUT and from UCT as well. I want to thank the CEO of the Castle of Good Hope for a very wonderful presentation. I want to give a big thank you to the SAHRA colleagues who delivered our position on memorials and statues very well. And I want to give a big thank you to Palmyra for talking about adaptive reuse. And a big thank you to you as well, Program Director. If I can just invite all the guests in the meeting to please switch on their microphones. So you have heard me correctly. Could you please switch on your microphones? If you are joining us virtually, please switch on your microphones. And please give a big round of applause to SAHRA's Built Environment Unit.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for a very nice session.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. That concludes our discussion for the morning, and we'd like to thank you very much for everything, and have a good day further. Thank you.